Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Moorhead Public Service Commission to order. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
May I have a second? Got a second? Got a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. Any changes before I call for a motion on the consent agenda? I think we're going to get it down to pretty simple conversation here today, folks. So, okay, I'd entertain a motion then to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Need a second?
Second.
Got a second? Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. Customers to be heard and recognitions. I see no customers per se, but
No recognitions?
no recognitions, nothing like that, okay. Moving on to number 6, old business. Kind of everything this evening's old business, but this is the formal old business, so if there's anything for us to return to. Nothing, okay. Moving on to reports. Heidi, members of the city council.
I don't have anything. Chuck, do you have anything?
Everything's quiet in River City.
Yeah.
All right. Since Monday, yeah. All righty. Nothing from city council. Members of the Public Service Commission. Anything? You know, we were just here like an hour and a half ago. Yeah, can't be a lot that's happened since then, so, okay. Nothing there. Bill, Mr.
No.
General Manager.
No general manager report.
No report this week. We just met an hour and a half ago. So,
Yep.
yeah, right, okay. Actually, it was a week ago, folks, so. All right, let's move on to a conversation about 20th and 21st Street electric and water line relocation, our agreement with the city of Moorhead et al. Everything above and below and in between. We have guests to visit with us today, particularly Dr. Z, but also our city manager, Chris. I'm hoping that what we will do here today is we will have a really good, open, inclusive, complete conversation about this project and where it is going, what our timing is, how we're paying for it, where the stress points are, so that we can actually share in those stress points. Because as was indicated in that meeting, that seems like it was so recently, and it was just last week. We've got some things to talk about so that we all end up in the same place. And so I don't intend to make a long speech about that. I just really am anxious for us to get to the same place so that this project can move forward and we can all be good with it. So with that, why don't I start with you, Bill? Kind of where I left off last week when I said, let's start. And let's get the material on the table. We have our city engineer here who's going to help us through the details of the project. And then I hope that what we can have, so I don't have to sit here and moderate and so forth, let's just have a really good conversation. And if you have questions, if you need to be heard, let's do it. So with that, Bill.
I'll do a brief start. And if you take a look at the agenda item that was provided, basically we set up our agenda items as a recommendation and then some background. The recommendation is that we come to an agreement about what the reimbursement would be for the water and electric relocation, water and electric transmission lines that need to be relocated for the 21st Street project. And it is a very good and very large community project. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Bob, for being here to talk about it. So that being said, I mean, an agreement is kind of what we would like to see. As far as background, the background information that we provided basically has 3 parts. There was what I'll call a former understanding, what we kind of thought that the city was going to fully reimburse Moorhead Public Service for the relocation of those lines. And then on March 5th, and that's point number 2 really, we got, I'll call it an adjusted understanding, which was, and I'll just quote you, Bob, the city may not be able to reimburse MPS for the estimated $2.25 million cost to relocate MPS facilities. We might have a little discussion about how much that dollar amount is. Bob and I talked about that earlier today. But we'll just say $2.25 million to relocate water and electric lines of Moorhead Public Service. Point number 3 really is again the recommendation. If we went from a former understanding now to this adjusted understanding, what the goal today maybe is have a conversation about, what is the current understanding? And then can we formalize that into an agreement? And I think there's plenty of things to talk about. Bob and I have talked about it a little bit. Chris and I have talked about it a little bit. Maybe the commission will understand, and at some point the council is going to have to be involved in this. But just trying to figure out where the reimbursement is on your list of priorities and what can we expect. Because the difference between the former understanding, which was, you're going to try and reimburse us fully, to we may not be able to reimburse you, is a long ways apart, from 0 to 100%. So
I think maybe what we might need to do is back up just ahead. I need to understand how we got to where we are. I don't know about the rest of you, but maybe I'm slow. But if it changed that much from a few weeks ago to now, and what the number is, and it was a surprise, I guess what I'd like to know is how we got here, and how we got to this number, and so forth. So, maybe that's a little background around the project itself, what the resources are that are being brought from the state and so forth, and how it is that these other costs are possibly being allocated to us. So I don't know how we begin with that, but maybe just a little background.
So, Commission, thanks. Chris Volker, City Manager. I think I can add a little bit to the background, although I will say I wasn't here for a majority of the background.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
But what I do understand is on Bill's 3 points. First of all, yes, the city absolutely hoped, and that was a word we used often, is that we were going to try, and we had hoped we would get enough funding so MPS did not have to contribute back. That's been our goal all along. So I will say that Bill is absolutely right. We've always hoped. Second point about receiving a memo on March 5th that says something different. I don't believe it says anything different than we've always said. We're going to hope that we get the funding, but there may be a situation or that we might find ourselves in where the commission or MPS would have to contribute towards the moves. And that has been repeatedly communicated, especially every time, as Bill mentions in his memos, every time there's been a mayor and council communication and something about this that has went to the council, I have purposely worked with MPS and made sure that the language was that we may be seeking reimbursement. So that's been a very consistent message. So there has not been anything different. We've always said we hope. On March 5th, we're just reminding them, or MPS and the commission, that we are still hoping, but there's nothing has changed. There's been absolutely no change. Okay, so I need to clarify that. The memo did not say we would have a decision on this. We're a ways from it. We are coming to some financial difficulties on this, and we'll talk about that. The third point Bill's making is he's hoped there would be an agreement. That an agreement means two parties would come to an agreement. And I think the communication or the memo that your general manager has sent to you basically says, he's asking you to approve an agreement. There's been no agreement. We have to have these discussions, right? And the council hasn't decided. That's the most important part, that this has to go to the council. This whole package has to go to the council. We hope it goes to the council in May. I think the end of May is what we're hoping for, but again, we're coming up with some financial difficulties on this project, so we should talk about that.
Yep.
So that's in terms of background. I'll let Bob deal with the details about 2.25 or 3.1 million. I have no idea about that.
So, Commissioners, if it's all right, I'd maybe back up just a little bit more and kind of walk through some of the highlights of how we got to where we are, excuse me, today. It was spring of 2017, when the state allocated a significant sum of money to the project. We had been searching for funding for this project since 2002, and you're probably all fully aware of the long search for funding and many attempts to secure funding. While we were fortunate enough in the spring of 2017 to be allocated just over $42 million in state bonding funds. So upon notice of that, we initiated work to finalize the plans. Previous to that, we had taken the plans to a 95% completion state and essentially put them on the shelf, awaiting funding to finalize that. We had also acquired all of the right-of-way. So we began work on finalizing the plans last summer. Started to put together some updated cost estimates and started working with BNSF on the agreement needed to build the project. Actually, BNSF and the Otter Tail Valley Railroad, although the primary player here is certainly BNSF. Working through the process with them, we did present to the City Council, and I'm going to refer to one of the attachments I think you have. This is, I'm not sure which attachment that is. It's attached to the December 11th City Council meeting agenda.
Second page of attachment C.
There's been, and just to know, there have been various iterations of this as we've learned more information. This was our best attempt with the information available to prepare a budget for the City Council's consideration to understand how the $42 million in state funding played into the overall project cost and what other sources of funding the city might need to allocate. And I don't want to go through this in excruciating detail. You're probably not interested in line by line.
No.
One of the major issues that was negotiated with the railroad and took a significant amount of time was in connection with First Avenue South, whether First Avenue South would remain open or closed, in conjunction with new track that would be laid as part of that project, what we commonly refer to as a Y connection. We spent, I think, the better part of 2 months, maybe a little bit more, in pretty intense negotiation with the railroad, resulting in a decision to ultimately, when the project is completed, close First Avenue in exchange for a significant contribution from the railroad towards the project, much greater than they were required to contribute by any statute or other state or federal rule. So again, this table, and I'm referring to the right-hand side, the one that doesn't have the big X in it, because that refers to the project as currently proposed, was an attempt to capture all of the costs and the revenue sources that we knew would be available. So just very generally, under city contracts, that's primarily the contract that we will issue for construction. There are certain costs that we need to pay to the railroad. Those are listed under the column paid to BNSF. The purple shading represents that extra piece of track that I was mentioning, the Y track that goes through First Avenue. Those are costs for both city contract and paid to BNSF. And so at the time, you'll note we had an estimated project cost of just under $52 million. The bottom portion of that, and I should note, just to be very clear about that, in those costs, you will see construction for MPS water and electric identified separately, just for clarity's sake, to make sure everybody understood what our estimates for those costs were, and to make sure that we captured the full cost of the project and weren't leaving anything out. In terms of funds available to construct the project. Again, the state allocation of about $42 million. The BN contribution, again, negotiated $5.7 million. So to make up the balance, you'll note that we have dedicated $2 million of municipal state aid funds, and at that point identified about 1.7 as not specifically allocated anywhere, identified here as local funds, city cost share. And if you read the memo that goes with it, it's pretty clear that we still needed to identify the source of funding for that amount. So this was the status as of December. To bring us up to today, we finalized the plans, and plans were placed out for contractors last Friday. So the intent is that we'll open bids April 25th. What I can tell you about the plans is, along with the plans was an updated construction estimate, and that construction estimate was about $1.5 million more than what was included in this table. We have separately been working on the very detailed terms of the agreement with the railroad. That's been sort of a long and challenging process. Just note that up to this point, all of the railroad costs here are costs that were shared with us verbally. They did not provide any detailed cost estimates, would not provide any until we have an agreement. And so we've had the language of the agreement shared back and forth. We're working on finalizing that. We still have yet to receive their detailed cost estimates. What was shared with me in a conversation about a week, not more than 2 ago, was that due to the complexity of the rail and all of the connections to the various tracks in this location, their estimates are going to be significantly higher than the numbers that we had in our budget. Probably as much as $2 to $2.5 million more. So we're trying to nail all of these costs down. I've been promised those detailed estimates very soon. Have yet to see them. At that point, we're going to update this budget. It's pretty safe to say that what's going to come out the bottom here is that this line that says city funds, local share, that sort of undetermined source of funds is going to be bigger than the number that's shown here. And so we're going to have to determine what sources of funds are available and attempt to allocate those. So we're hoping to bring the agreement along with an updated estimate to the council in April. I was hoping for next Monday. It's pretty clear that we're not going to have the numbers available to do that. So most likely it'll be before the city council on the 23rd of February.
May.
I'm sorry, of April.
April. Wait.
We'll split the difference.
Wait, what date are we? April 23rd.
It doesn't feel like it. So the 23rd of April,
that's
we're
right.
hoping to have the agreement before the council. Again, we're opening bids on the 25th of April and would hope to award a bid probably May 7th. So a lot of parts in motion here over the next roughly 6 weeks or so.
Can I summarize real quick? If you look at the construction costs on the far right side, so what Bob is saying is the $40.8 million for the construction went up about $1.5 million more. Burlington Northern costs, where it says $1.5 million in the far right column, went up to about $4 million instead, so up $2.5 million more. And then we always knew we had to come up with the $1.5 million. I also want to highlight that the council has taken the position they don't want to do special assessments to the owners along this corridor. So we don't have that resource, but adding the 1.5, 2.5 is another $4 million in addition to the 1.5 we were going to have to come up with. So when I say there's increased costs that we haven't figured out what to do about, and the council is hearing this for the first time, by the way, sitting at the table. So we were going to update them next week, next week. So Monday, whatever. Thank you. So that's where we're at.
So obviously, we don't have bids, right? So we don't know what that construction cost is yet, and that's a huge piece of this. And so some of that will be determined when we have those bids. You know, if one's optimistic and we get good bids, then maybe some of this resolves itself. If we get bids higher than our estimate, that's even more challenging than currently.
So we have some chapters that are unwritten here yet.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
And I think we always have, and I think
Yeah.
some of the language in the communications that we provided to council always noted that we will need direction in the future on how we deal with these relocations.
Yeah.
To be determined essentially as the project unfolds.
Well, I certainly understand the desire to not assess, adjacent. This is a project that the entire community
Exactly.
really needs, is really gonna benefit from. It's a safety project more than anything else. So, I mean, there's a convenience factor, but
Exactly.
this really does have to do with the safety of our folks too. So, so I can certainly understand that. That puts it on all of us to share. I guess one of the conversations that I kind of continually have with my friends on the council, as well as I think Chris, you and I have talked about this some too, is where's the right place to find those funds? Is it in consumer fees, or is it in what we assess everybody? Sometimes it seems to me the consumer fee is the wrong place to do that, because that is what we spend to buy what it is that we need, as opposed to the cost of government and services. And so that may be where we're kind of going with this as well, is we haven't anticipated the kinds of increases that it would take to generate these kinds of dollars from the utility standpoint. It's really fairly unanticipated at this point. And now we don't even know what the number needs to be.
Great.
Thanks to your update. Thank you very much, Bill. So,
Very well.
with those general comments, I'd sure open it up to the rest of you to dive in here. If you have questions, or if you want to get into anything more specifically with Bob or Chris or our members or whoever. As I said earlier, my hope is that we will all be in the same place on this as we conclude our conversation, at least for tonight. It's obvious we aren't going to have an agreement. There isn't anything to agree on, other than maybe principle. Yeah. So, with that, anybody? Heidi?
I have a question for Chris or Bill. Assessments. Would this project be of a scale that the entire city could be assessed, or could it only be the properties along the project?
So you could do, and we've done this on other projects, where you special assess individually the adjacent properties in a benefiting area that we would have to define. You keep that to a minimum. And so let's just say you needed $1 million. And you identify a benefiting area, you special assess 20% of that to that benefiting area. So $200,000 is special assessed. The other $800,000 could be paid by the city in general through property taxes. So essentially you'd issue a bond and pay for the debt service through property taxes. So you may recall that early on we had started down the path of that as an option. But essentially when the railroad agreed to the amount they agreed to, we didn't take any further action in that direction. Concept at that time was, and I think that was discussion at the council even, that with that amount we didn't believe we would have to go that route. We still could do that. The challenge now is to do that we would need to delay some of the actions. We would not be able to award a bid on May 7th. Need to back up and the council would need to adopt a few more resolutions. We'd have to issue notices.
Tony, is our sound working for you? Okay. I'll make sure we got good audio. Is that a conversation that can be revisited then, given what we're identifying here as a lot more dollars than, you thought you had a solution for the railroad, evidently.
I was feeling pretty good about this about a week ago.
Well,
Yeah.
let me remind everybody, we don't have the construction costs, right?
Right.
So we need that. This is, we're guessing. We just don't know. $40 million for an estimate is now 41.5. It could be off $1 million or $2 million. We don't know, so.
Could we do that? I think what we would end up doing is delaying the bid award. And right now, we're hoping to award a bid on May 7th. Part of the development of the final plans, we worked pretty closely with the school district. Big impacts to the high school, obviously. Our original phasing plan tried to keep access open on 21st Street as long as it could. Actually would have cost us more money. The school district was very excellent to work with. They agreed that we should try to shorten the duration of the project, and so that involves closing 21st Street. What they asked for in exchange was for us to do our best to try to limit the major impacts to one school year.
Wow.
So,
But we could do 2 summers,
so-
right?
Okay, well,
Right.
right.
So the idea would be 2018, we would begin construction as soon as we could, as soon as the school year was out.
Yeah.
We could go through the 18-19 school year with
Yeah.
detours, go through the summer of 19, and then hopefully have those detours gone before the school year. So the whole point of that is delaying the bid award sort of infringes upon that
That
arrangement.
idea, yeah. Chuck, did you have something?
Yeah.
And then-
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, what are the chances it does come under the estimate? I know you don't like the speculation. It's not in your nature.
I really don't know. Generally, we try to estimate these on the high side, but for it to be significantly below the estimate, I'd say chances are relatively small.
Okay. That's what
And I hope
figured.
I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I hope you are too. but- Thanks.
On a totally practical question, we will have to go in before you guys start the project, right? If we move the line especially. Is it the same for water, or is it just the electrical where we have to go first? Just electrical? So when were we planning to go in?
Well,
Before?
we started last fall with the distribution side. Our steel structures won't be here till the end of June, so we won't be able to start construction. We would actually probably have to do some type of temporary pole set on the transmission line to keep it in operation until, and outside of the shoe fly area, so that we could finalize our construction of the transmission.
Travis, quick aside on that. Did we settle or solve our problem on right away since last week?
Correct, yes, we did.
Okay,
We do have
good.
we do have a second option, and actually, we are finalizing conversations with the 3 property owners. And it's looking pretty good right now that we'll be able to get the easements from them and have everything locked in now.
Okay, so we can slide that one.
Correct. We could go in the right of way, or we can get an easement from them. They're actually comfortable with the easement, so we're kind of hoping to finish that in that route.
Okay.
We just need a finalized approval from the school board, and that would be the biggest issue. And we need to have one conversation with one of the property owners.
Okay. Good news.
Good news.
Good.
So would we start before we have council approval, basically? We start anyway?
Yes. Yeah, we would, steel cage, or the cages for the foundations should be here April 20th. Depending on our contractor's timing, they might start end of May, or depending on their other work that they're doing currently. The steel structures aren't in till the end of June, so they got about a month's worth of time where they can get those foundations in. The only issue is until we finalize the structure 9 placement, we can't actually apply for our railroad permit, so that's the only issue we have.
What happens if the construction estimate comes in at 50 million?
Then we're moving the line and they can do their projects in no time.
That is a good question, though. What, any more how does that affect your calendar, though?
So, I think if we were to receive bids that were significantly over the estimate, we would likely go back and look at the plans and see if there are any places where we can cut some cost, and probably revise the plans and rebid at some point. Obviously, that schedule then is out the window, and it's a whole new schedule. But I can't believe that we're not far enough along with this project that we're not gonna find some way to build it somehow. Hopefully that's not the route we take, but.
Well, you haven't found the efficiencies already.
Well, we'd like to think so, but when you get bid prices, that, those are very detailed bid prices, so
Yeah.
that gives you some indication where the contractors think the costs are. And from that, you can garner some information about what you might be able to change.
John, that's it.
So when the project was originally, I guess, approved, we knew there was gonna be dollars that were gonna have to be committed by the city or some source. Can you go into a little bit more what the thought process is, how that shortfall was gonna be funded? Through specials or bonding, or did there get any specifics into that?
That's an interesting question, because there's probably 10 different iterations of how things might have been paid for, depending on the source of funding that we were seeking. We applied for, I think, 4 federal grants, and there were 4 different splits of how things might be funded with those. I can't recall the details off the top of my head. We could certainly dig those out. When we were seeking the state funding, I know there were a couple different iterations of that. Combinations of cities, municipal state aid funds, those are transportation funds that we are allocated from the state. Special assessments, along with, as Councilmember Durand noted, a citywide, essentially, contribution. So there was a whole variety of sources that depended on the funding source that we were chasing. Even the state allocation was sort of all over the place. This was originally in the bonding bill in 2016, and in that bonding bill, I think we were only at 35 million. Then, if you recall or followed any of that, that was the bonding bill that failed at the very last minute of the session, and then was revived in 2017, and somehow we went from 35 to 42, which is, by today's standards,
Yes.
excellent.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's been all over the board, and I think, the goal the city had all along was just to secure as much as we possibly could, and then try to piece the rest together once we knew what that number was.
Did that answer your question? Not really.
I didn't think so.
I guess I was looking for more of a specific source of funding, because we knew we were gonna have a shortfall when it went, and there was gonna be city had a responsibility to cover that, and it seems to me that there should have been some specific plan in place versus piecemeal it without really knowing what we're gonna get and how much we're gonna get, and not really knowing how it was gonna be
So
paid.
we can dig all those various versions out and share them. There were specific plans for each one of those. Some of those are extremely painful. I can share that for certain. I think it's also important to note that we, at that time, were working off of estimates from the 95% plan set that was originally finished in 2009. And along the way, we did attempt to update those. What I can tell you is that as part of those plans, the water main work was in that estimate. What I can also tell you is that as part of those plans, the power relocation costs were not in that estimate. We had no information as to the magnitude of what that work would be. In fact, I don't think I knew till about last year.
I recall that. That was one of those early conversations that we sort of had about this when I was newer to the board. And we were really concerned about that. It seemed like that element of the project had just kind of been forgotten. We didn't think about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I did go back, and we had our consultant go back as well and tried to reconstruct the path that we got to the 95% plans, and we were able to find quite a bit of correspondence between, at the time, Dave Cayley, Travis's predecessor, coordinating what needed to be done, but I don't think we ever got to a conclusion of the specific, at least I couldn't find a specific dollar amount associated with what that was.
Travis has stayed real close to this project, so.
Travis and I talk a lot. We do,
Yeah.
on a variety of things.
One, you had asked about, do we not do the project? We've got the poles, the steel structures ordered. We've got a contractor locked in basically a contract. We've partially relocated the distribution lines. Do we stop it? That's a question. Everything's on its way, so we could, but I don't know if it's the right thing to do.
No, we have said how long we're gonna stand it, right?
No.
That's not an option.
Yeah. But if they don't get the funding or the bid comes in really, really high, that was the question that was asked. Do we stop and not do our portion of the project? So that's for you guys to answer.
With this understanding where we are, how do we proceed from here so that we have an open communication about this, and maybe even a creative process to solve it, so that we're a team, heading for a finish line as opposed to a couple of different teams heading towards some finish lines. It'd be great to have the same one, be on the same path.
So the city is absolutely, whatever you guys want to do, we will communicate however you prefer. We will, continue to talk. We really need those estimates, right? The construction estimates. We thought we were communicating well, so when we did the letter, just as a reminder, and I think maybe some more, every step along the way, we should have an in-person discussion. That's what I would suggest. The city and MPS, and let's just keep, we need the next numbers, right? That's what we need at this point. So I think we should just keep verbally communicating, would be my suggestion. So we're more than willing to do whatever you want in regard to that.
Bill, you seem to be leaning in.
Well, I think the ongoing conversation is going to be necessary. At staff level, we have had plenty of conversation, but as you can understand from the conversation today, there's not a lot of detail as to where they're going to get the money if the estimate is high, which probability is high that the estimate is high. Once the estimate comes in, then I think we have another conversation just like this one, because we're being asked to make up the difference. And I don't think that was ever the understanding that we understood early on.
So I need to clarify, we're not asking that. The memo did not say that. Let me clarify. It just said we need to keep talking. That's exactly what we're doing. So I need to clarify, it never ever said, MPS, you need to contribute X amount. That wasn't ever what was stated.
I think it's worth mentioning, what I read through the history of the recent memos anyway, is that you've respected the fact that we as a public or a municipal utility aren't to be treated like the private utilities, in that, if we don't have to pay this, we don't. And so I think that the word assuming, it reappeared several times in the memos, assuming that MPS won't have to pay. But we need to know more, obviously. You need some bids to reflect what your assumptions are, as well as we need to know what the additional costs are. I don't think this board needs to get into the weeds so much about it. It's really helpful to know where we are. But over the next several weeks and months, it appears that there's that communication does need to take place, and it needs to be very, very across the table as opposed to in memos. Let's understand what's going on.
And again, just a reminder to everybody that, because we're starting to relocate, which we should do, which we will do, there's potential for $1.5 million expense that may or may not be reimbursed.
Or more.
Well, for the electric, because we
For the
wouldn't
electric.
we wouldn't start the water until before date, right? So for electric, let's say it's $1.5 million, we may or may not get a, reimbursed for it. I mean, if the project, for example, gets delayed, or if there's no money, we'll have the cost right now.
And then it'll be helpful for us as a board to have a conversation with our staff then about what those kinds of expenses mean to our rates. If we do have to start to plan to recover that, then we have to have a difficult conversation about even a mid-year correction. Unless we're able to push it toward the end of the year when we really get into budgets, but that just makes the rate.
Well, of course, unless you have reserves or other sources. I mean, you need to look at the whole budget, of course, before you
go to reserves,
have
but
that
then-
discussion.
Then,
Yeah.
we also have intentions for those reserves, and
Right,
they're for,
right.
they're for other things, so. Folks out there, I'm not wanting to raise particular alarm that way. I just think it's important for us to have our eyes wide open, that if it does come down to us having to participate in this, it's impactful. And that's why I brought up the earlier question about whether it is we do this through consumer fees on what it is that we're providing, in electricity and water, or whether we find some other ways to do this across the community that might be more appropriate.
So that raises an excellent point about timing of funding, and I think there's probably a fair, this is if we start construction June of this year, this is a 2 to 2.5, hopefully not 3-year construction project.
Yeah.
So over the course of that 3 years, there's funding coming in, coming out, going out, so that there's a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, during that construction period, although not for projects of this magnitude frequently, but the city does float a certain amount of cost. So we would even have to do that on our side with some municipal state aid funding. And it's very clear to me that our $2 million of municipal state aid funding is not going to be sufficient. We're going to have to find a way to use more of that funding, take it from other projects. So timing is an issue with that as well. And so there may be opportunities to look at this over a 2 to 3, who knows, maybe even a little bit longer period of time to fit all the pieces together. One other comment I think is really important to make here. These are state funds, and we've all had experience with other state-funded projects such as flood mitigation, which was bonding money. And I think that's evidence of the city's interest and willingness to work with the commission, in that I think on almost all of the electric relocations that had to be done as part of that, we reimbursed those. So it's not taking a stance here that we just don't want to do it. As a matter of fact, we just also recently learned after this memo that we can't use these state funds for any utility relocation. So water, power, sanitary sewer, all of those costs have to be paid with local funds of some kind. That's a requirement of the program, state statute. We didn't learn of that until MnDOT asked Minnesota Management and Budget under this program, because we were asking to get paid for that. And they ruled that the statute doesn't authorize reimbursement for utility relocations. That left us a little bit holding the bag as well. I mean, the city is trying to legislatively correct that, but as of today, that's where we stand.
So even with municipal utilities.
What does that differentiation then mean, between the privates and the?
Well, not so much private or public, just any utility
Just any
relocation.
utility.
So
Yeah.
sanitary sewer, we have to pay with local funds. We can't use these state funds.
Yeah.
Water, power. If we had obligation to private utilities, we couldn't use these funds for those either. In this case, we have no obligation to private utilities.
John?
When are the bids hopefully coming in?
April 25th.
And when is our next meeting?
2 weeks from today, so 20th. 17th, excuse me.
That would be May first.
So, yeah, we'll be into May.
So is it then something that we need another special meeting to visit with the city specifically once they get, or do we delay our meeting here? Because I feel that with them here, it's very beneficial,
Yeah.
and certainly our council members here, but they'll be, would that be a sufficient time to look at that, or is that too quick for you to kind of share those numbers?
I'm struggling with whether,
Yeah.
you know, we'll get the bids, and I'm trying to figure out, we need to inform the council
Yeah,
too, right?
there's that.
And their meeting.
Oh, them too.
Yeah, I mean, kind of important here.
Yeah.
So that meeting is May 7th. Thank you, Casey. So,
All right.
yes, you meet May 15th.
So-
That would probably be the
That's
proper
probably good
date.
timing.
Yeah, I think
That's
so.
probably good. Bob?
Does that work?
Is that
Yeah,
good timing as far as
you know,
coming out of the numbers? And-
Yeah, I think that's fine. There's really, from my perspective, there's two sort of key things here. One is when I actually get the detailed estimates from the railroad.
Yeah.
And so far, I'm assuming the number that was conveyed verbally is what I'm gonna see.
If
The
it's
next
anything
one's
like the
bids.
Quiet Zone, we'll hear from them in 2022.
Well, I hope not.
So, yeah, I mean, I think the time frame you're talking about is fine.
Yeah, okay.
When are you looking to award? Because you said May 7th before.
That's what we're hoping.
Well, then, talking to us on May 15th is gonna be a little too late maybe, or?
That's what I'm struggling with the council. I mean, we need some direction and communication with the council.
I think it would be urgent that you speak with, you have conversations with,
Oh, we will, before we go to council,
Yeah.
absolutely.
because you wouldn't wait until
No,
May 15th to tell them who you awarded the bid. And
no. That's
Well,
what-
Travis, you're certainly.
I'm trying to figure out the
monitoring
timing.
this, you know, day to day.
Yeah, these
Bob and
guys-
I are, talking as things come up, so.
So Travis, you could then relay information.
Yeah, I could talk to Bob and we could relay it on the first.
You know, the other thing we could do is come on the first, like Travis said, and
Yeah.
help with that communication.
Say again?
We could come on the first, your May
Right.
1st meeting, help with that communication. We just won't have had the benefit of having a conversation with the council yet.
Well, May
That
1st
makes me a little nervous, but-
May 1st actually might be a real good meeting. The only thing is that, this is a public meeting and you would have some numbers out ahead of time. But if you're gonna award on May 7th anyway, it might be a good time to have a conversation, but I don't know if you'll be.
We can try.
I don't know if you'll be ready to, because you can award if you think it's close enough, because you could say right now, if it's
Well,
within 10%, you're gonna do it.
Of course.
And then you just gotta come up with your local funding options, which on the 15th, we can definitely talk about, and then it's a done deal. You're doing the project,
Yeah.
but, let's talk a little bit more about the numbers and what we're kinda thinking about where we're gonna get the numbers, or get the dollars from. We're not, like Commissioner Maynard Meelan said, we're not gonna stand in the way, but we are very interested in what what you're thinking about for our contribution to this whole project.
Okay.
Chris, I think if you just email.
That's what we were
council
just
and-
saying.
And let them know that.
Okay.
Why you're
Right.
coming to present before
think that
council hears,
works.
I think everybody will be fine.
Okay, that sounds good.
Bob, do you post preliminary bid awards before the building council on testing in? So will the bidders already have an idea? I'm just putting that out there because it might not be the first time the public hears it at our meeting.
Yeah, I believe we do. I'm not sure how this project's gonna play out.
A little bit
It's
better.
not too often we do $40 million.
Yeah, for sure Travis and Bob will be discussing it,
This
yeah.
isn't 40 million anymore, Bob, it's 50.
50. Well, actually,
Yeah,
we
let's-
need to go back to what was.
A few million here and a few million.
By the
Yeah.
time it's done, it'll be 60. at
Yeah,
least,
I
I'll
hope
say
not.
that. No, actually it will, because
Chuck has some.
So you're thinking of send, my German mind can't handle all this conversation.
There's two of you.
Yeah.
So May 1st, you're gonna send out an email?
I think we will before, we'll come here, discuss this with you May 1st. You will get an email before, so you have some idea, like you did today.
Timeframe.
Um,
What kind of timeframe? will
Between
we-
the 23rd and the 1st, so.
25th is the
25th.
deadline.
Okay, so between the 25th and the 1st. so-
And what would you email? What
Where
kind
we're
of
at.
information? Okay,
Mhm.
just a status update?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Crunch the numbers overnight.
I mean, my goal
We'll
is
know.
to have
Okay.
all of the costs and the funding, a proposal at least for the funding sources identified. And one of the things we would like to do is still visit with our finance folks about, what are some, make sure
Options.
we've explored all of the options. Some of those may just be some time options, right? But make sure we have all the opportunity to explore those.
And Chris, at our next council meeting, we can give council reports, we can give an update to and explain to the council that
Good idea.
you'll be here discussing
That's a good
before the
idea.
council gets a chance, but as to why and how and all that works.
Okay, perfect. That'd be great. Okay, everybody good?
John?
The still concern I have with the process that I'm hearing is that the city is going to review the numbers. They're gonna decide who's gonna contribute what. Is that what you just said? or not?
No, I think what we said is we'll get the numbers on the 25th.
Okay.
Bob will come up with some suggestions. We'll talk to finance to see what more we can contribute. That's gonna be an important part, right? And see if we can cover a good part of whatever increase, and it might be the timing. For example, it might be municipal state aid funds over a period of years, right? We said $2 million for 1 year. There might be a resource there if we can extend that out. We need to look at all our options. Then we will communicate with the council about what, where we're at, and then we'll come to you to discuss that. So there will not be any decision by the council at all before that. May 1st date.
What else do we need to talk about?
Well, I think.
It seems like
you
we
know,
need
we'll
to
just-
wait for a little time.
Yeah, we'll just continue this on May 1st. I really appreciate, Chris and Bob coming, and
Oh, yeah.
I do think it's above Chris and my pay grade.
For sure.
These kind of discussions. So you need to be in this conversation, and everybody needs to be comfortable with it once we figure out what to do. But, we're trying to figure out what collaboration means, what partnership means. I mean, I think this is a big step in that direction.
It is.
It is.
And I appreciate the tone and really the spirit of this. This is what we're supposed to do.
Mhm.
So this is good. It occurs to me, we're the budget committee. If there's any kind of interim conversation that we might want to have.
We are.
Are you, am I out now?
You're out.
Are you it? Oh, that's right. That's right. I took myself out of that, yeah.
No, I think we
Yeah, the
can
mind is going as I get older.
also- They
so.
ousted you now.
Yeah, I was ousted. Anyway, the budget committee may be important in the interim in this if we really do want to start knocking around some of the ideas and impacts. So that'd be these guys through Bill. Yeah, so,
Okay, sounds great.
So I think we're gonna have a busy month.
Yes.
And it wouldn't hurt to maybe have a few conversations in the meantime on what is rattling around in that cranium.
Oh, who knows?
Not much.
It's a scary place to go.
That's for sure.
Let's be careful about that.
But, I mean, if we're gonna come up with what is gonna be palatable, it's probably important that we start having some conversations about it. So. Alrighty, well, golly, I've lost track of the agenda. I suppose we better get back to it. I don't think we're gonna approve anything, so I think we'll just conclude this part of the conversation. We can move on to the strategic plan.
Thank you.
A little bit of work to do there.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
But Chris and Bob, thank you very much. Item number 9 is to approve the 2018 to 2020 strategic plan for Moorhead Public Service, tabled on, way back on December 5th. Time flies when you're having fun.
I think you actually did have a conversation after that.
We did, didn't we, in
Yeah.
January
It's
or
I don't
February?
know, it was never removed from the table.
Oh, right, okay, we just, yeah, that's
So
right.
that's just the official table motion.
Well, let's get back to
There
that
hasn't
for a
been any
little bit.
motions since.
Let's get back to that for a little bit and see what we can do. You got it. I don't mind if you take it. Do you have anything to add about this? You like it? I don't.
I don't.
So, just to serve notice, that if you do leave, I'm not, yeah, I'm not comfortable with some language that's in it, that I think we need to talk about. And, so, Bill, why don't we just start with you? If you need to take a.
Well, maybe just clarify, last
Yeah.
meeting here, I can't remember, is that David suggested that there's some changes,
Mhm.
meaning on how it was written, and that those changes haven't been done, so again, we're looking at approve a document that the changes haven't
isn't
been
ready.
implemented. So I would just think that we're not gonna vote on it again until those changes have been made. And I think David said that the commission or somebody would get together and kind of collaborate on what will be
Yeah.
changed
Yeah.
in a couple of those goals.
And we haven't done that. There hasn't been any wordsmithing at all. Should we just get some wordsmithing done ahead of time rather than try to do it
Yeah,
by
we can do
committee
that.
tonight?
Yep.
Okay, well then,
Is it pretty much all on goal 3.3, the
For me-
MPS team at one location? Is
for
that
me,
the one?
it's the one location.
Yep.
I don't like the wording.
I mean, is that really the one that's left?
That's left for me.
Okay, and if there is any other ones that come up, just tell me and, we can work on the wordsmithing and then we can talk about it the next time we meet.
And I apologize, I did not prepare language to bring into this conversation. I was kind of focused in preparation for what we just did, so I kind of let that one hang.
I mean, the good news is that Les Bakke is the one who started our strategic planning where we called them directions.
Mhm.
And we're saying that, this is the direction we're going. Doesn't mean that we're gonna, make it to that destination, or it doesn't even really have a destination.
Mhm.
It's a direction, and we're having good conversation over it, so I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think the big thing that we're wrestling with is, does MPS at some point end up at one location?
Mhm.
And we probably will have that opportunity here in a couple of years. The city is looking for more space. They've already taken some space from us. And so, I see that direction happening as well. So it's a good conversation to have.
An added step in this, and I might suggest, because one of the things that we've been talking about trying to get scheduled, and we haven't yet, is the group of four plus the general manager plus the city manager for a couple of conversations about a couple of these elements. This could be one of those.
Yep.
So that we could kind of get into what that future
Yep.
is. I'm real uncomfortable with this language without that conversation about that future.
Well, and I'm uncomfortable with moving forward with plans
Yeah.
without, both bodies having some kind of vision for that in the future.
Right.
I mean, if it's obvious to me, that doesn't make any difference. It has to be something that everybody sees. So, I mean, I have to get that communicated to you. And we do have time, and that's where this conversation is important.
Well, a plan that isn't changeable isn't worth it.
So, Dave, I'm just thinking here as far as looking at my notes here.
Yeah.
From the last plan that was drafted to this one, goal 3.1 was a change, 3.2 was changed, 3.3 is new, and 3.4 is new.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the commission has had a lot of opportunity to discuss any of those
We
changes
really
or
haven't.
additions. So
We really haven't.
I would really kind of think that all those goals should be at least discussed
Sure.
here
Okay.
to get some, maybe just be terms or a few words here, but I'm not sure how much, what is written today versus before and what those changes would mean to the goals.
Can we make a commitment to each other that we noodle this between now and the 1st of May, so that when we do meet back here for a strategic plan, we'll have that conversation, but that won't take all night. And that we dive into what this meeting is supposed to be for. So we just look forward to the May meeting, and especially that page, we just dive into that page.
Well, and if it takes May and a little bit of June, I mean, it's not a problem with us.
Yeah.
Our executive team has their strategic planning in June. So it'll actually be perfect timing to have talked about a lot of this stuff.
Well, we're not gonna build a city hall by July, so.
Right.
it's, you know, that's kind of a sure bet, so.
Well, and that's a whole nother part of the conversation.
It
'Cause I'm
is.
assuming
It is.
City Hall is where City Hall is right now, and there's some expanding that
Mhm.
is happening within the existing City Hall. You know, we're getting pushed and squeezed, and so is the city. So, I mean, I'm presuming that at some point, we say, hey, we're looking at moving, and the city says, hey, that's great. Can we take over your spot? But that may not be it, so.
We'll see, we'll see.
Well, yeah, and we've got our structural engineer that is able to talk about this building and going up on May 1st as well. So we may want to do strategic planning in June and have that
Do
conversation.
you wanna
in
keep
May.
it conceptual, folks, or do you wanna get into engineering on May 1st?
Push that off a little bit.
Let's be conceptual rather than, thanks Travis, but listen,
We kind of penciled it in because we want to talk about it. So.
I think that's premature, yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
And a question here, Nick.
Gotcha.
The group of 4, we're gonna meet before May 1st? You think that's advice? Okay.
I think that'd be a good idea.
I think it's a really good idea if we do.
So let's, if you can poll us and find, because that's between, you know, not only the 4 of us, but then also
Four and Bill and
the
Chris, right?
general
Yep.
manager of the city.
We'd like to get that transfer.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we wanna get, you know, we wanna get that, in fact, that's something that I think we ought to just start the paperwork on.
Yep.
Well, we can have it drafted because it's not going to be hard to adjust it.
We're
It's
just-
just basically changing the term. So we can bring that to that meeting. And, you know, the other items that we wanted to talk about, one of them is this one, and I'd like to have some kind of an agreement. Whether it's written or not, I'm not sure, but then the billing one is the other issue that we need to talk about. And I think we're getting closer on all of those. And this was, I think, a really good meeting, so.
If we can get one done, let's get one, let's take one off the,
Well, and we kinda thought we had that one done.
yeah.
You know, it's really just,
It is,
let's,
it's just
let's get
sign.
the paperwork done so that budgeting can start to happen.
How long of a meeting do you guys want?
Hour and a half.
Hour and a half?
Yeah, 90.
On the item of getting stuff done, totally out of the agenda, where are we on the power pipeline?
I told him just, I think today or yesterday, that question was coming.
Actually, that's
Yeah.
important, because
No.
that was in line.
Yep, so we, March 13th or so, we got a letter back from the MPCA. We're working on a GM report for one of the next meetings, I don't remember. I just wanted to talk with John a little bit about that as well, too. Actually, should be at the next meeting. So we got it, they found no open issues with the property. The one thing that is stated in there, that MPCA won't close the project until the redevelopment of the land. So it could sit for several years until the city does something with the land. I think we're still working with, I think it's Aaron is working with Attorney Lars, or Attorney Weir, on trying to finalize some agreement stuff that was done a few years ago. And then I think we're still working on the property down by Makara Industrial Park, or the new industrial park. So we're still working on some issues there as well too. But yes, we did finally get a letter back from the MPCA. So
So there's no outsider standing in the way now, it's between,
correct. Yep. So
so my recommendation would just be, just get it done.
okay. Aye, aye, Captain.
That'd be great.
Another land question.
Another land question.
Well, that might be a G4. We'll put together some talking points, because we may need some, it may be above our pay grade on that one as well, because it seems like it is small. So,
Yeah, there is definitely some communication between Aaron and Sarah Weir trying to hash out some issues. So
Who are those two people?
Aaron is one of John's attorneys, and then Sarah is an attorney for John Shockley.
Okay. Now, we do pay them, right, so we can tell them to hurry it up.
Yes.
I think
Would you
we.
like to do John, make somebody feel it?
John, you had another land
Well,
question?
heard something about maybe a Van Raden who has had significant health issues just recently. Is that our Van Raden who we're trying to buy or close this land with?
That's done.
That is
We're
done,
done.
so
Yeah,
we're
that-
on nothing more about
But I
that.
don't know if that's
It's done. I haven't heard that, but,
But that-
I'll just visit with you.
But, yeah.
But we're done with that.
But that
So
deal-
that closed before the end of the year.
Yeah.
Right before the end of the year.
Well, I thought there were still some documents to be signed, so I just
I
wondered.
think
think
it's
there's
pretty much, I think it's all done. isn't it?
no, we even,
Yeah,
have
Nancy
the
is just
state of
back.
Minnesota, there was one
Okay.
small matter we closed, even though the state of Minnesota hadn't given us the clearance, and we got the clearance from the state of Minnesota.
We're kind of wandering. Anything more on strategic plan, you know? We're not gonna, old business. Or old business, but yeah, okay, we're not gonna close.
Didn't read my notes.
Upcoming meetings, there are a couple of semi-important ones. Do we have any reason to have anybody in St. Paul? Are you going,
I
or,
will be going, if anyone wants to join me,
okay?
it's an opportunity if you enjoy that type of thing.
Do we have any legislative goals that are in particular position that are,
I mean, I don't think there's anything that's real active, but there's a few things that are out there that are of concern to us.
okay?
Again, a lot of it is defensive.
Mhm.
One issue that we've been working on is water tower painting. And we had this nice opportunity before that's now being rescinded where, and I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, but basically you hire a engineering firm to be the general for painting because the painters were such bad players in the region. And the legislature's looking at rescinding that, so now we'd be back to sending bids out to painters. And that's just isn't working. That doesn't work very well for us, but
Oof.
it appears like that's going to pass. So that's
Brought forward by the paint lobby or something?
well, painting contractors, yeah.
I suppose.
Training contractor union.
So, other than that, I mean, I don't think there's anything that's real.
Nothing pressing then, annual meeting for NRES, but that's well in.
And that, I'll just make a plug for that again. That is a really good one-day meeting from noon one day to noon the next. And so you can drive there one morning, stay overnight one night, drive back in the afternoon, be back by 5 o'clock. So as long as the weather's, spring comes.
I'm working on going to that, so
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
And they bring in national speakers from American Public Power, from Western Area Power. I mean, they pack it in one day, so.
Casey, if three of us go to that, do you have to tell the world that we did?
I don't think so.
Okay.
He's in the commissioner.
As long as you don't transact to any official NPS business.
What do we ride together in a car?
I think you're fine as long as you don't transact any.
Yeah.
Don't do
Yeah.
any business.
Don't do any business.
Talk about fishing.
I'm gonna
There you go.
find-
You talk it out right.
Yeah, okay. Anything else before I call for a motion to adjourn?
You had on your 10B,
10B?
Lisa was in the online agenda, did that change?
I don't think so. Oh,
Oh, the closed session items.
closed session, I know, we're skipping that.
We're skipping all that?
Because
We'll
Ralph's,
skip that tonight.
Okay.
it's
we don't
Ralph's 25th anniversary today.
Yeah, he's trying,
I wanna get to 50, so I need to know.
so we'll do the closed business next time.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
In the regular meeting in chambers, council chambers. Okay. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Got a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.